So today we have the pleasure of chatting with James Belding, the founder of Tokenized and one of the most articulate people on what the future of finance and smart contracting looks like that I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. I see a few new faces today, which is great to see. On these webinars, for at least this style, it's going to be primarily, at least to start, myself asking James questions, but we really want this to be interactive. So if James ever says something and you want to kind of ask a question or something, just use the tool to raise your hand. And then when that happens, I'll unmute you. Sorry. It's okay. I will unmute you and then you can ask the question directly, just audio only or with your camera to James or myself. And if you feel more comfortable, you can feel free to just DM me via Zoom questions you'd like me to ask James, or you can even just like write them for everyone to see in the chat. So really hope to hear from everyone here. This is an invite-only webinar series. So I trust that everyone here is going to ask some great questions. So without further ado, I will let James Belding introduce himself, and we can start to learn more about James and Tokenized. So welcome to the webinar today, James. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, so I'm James, the founder and CEO of Tokenized. So our flagship product is a smart contracting platform. So we picked that term or terminology very, very carefully. We added the ing to contract. So rather than smart contracts, which are a fundamental underpinning of what we use, we are thinking of this in a much broader sense in terms of delivering value to companies and users. And we think ultimately our smart contracting platform can power or be one of the solutions that powers a smart contracting financial system, which basically unlocks significant value across the entire life cycle of contracts, particularly in the private markets.
So James, can you describe in detail what a smart contracting future looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about the private markets or even just finance more generally and commercial relationships and contracts that kind of define or underpin commerce, there's a ton of complexity, there's a ton of admin, there's a ton of steps and rote work and admin work. So we've gone very far from 20 years ago, let's say, in terms of software, automation, driving efficiencies, but it still remains a very complex set of tasks to kind of make it all work and to manage your investments and on both sides, being an issuer as well as a holder. And we think that by bringing the contracts into a digital future or a digital system and having software take advantage of those characteristics, we can significantly unlock efficiencies across the life cycle, particularly in things like reporting, generating corporate records, so like cap tables, registers, subsequent administration processes like resolutions being passed, affecting the actions of a resolution or the resolution, and managing all the details that sort of are very consequential to everyone involved. So this is really about the next frontier of business record keeping in terms of digitization in our view. It's one of the harder ones to do because of the complexity that you have in contracts and the wide variety of terms and conditions that you can have and all the different people involved. But it's, we think this is where a tremendous amount of value is going to be unlocked. And you can sort of imagine even down to, eventually it's not going to be right there in the short term, but down to the accounting side of things, having things pulled in and accounted for much more automatically. Because today it's very, very difficult to pull all those details out of contracts and spreadsheets and emails and resolutions and things like that. So we were looking at the whole thing holistically. How can we create the most automated financial system possible and the best experience for everyone involved, including lawyers, including advisors and accountants, as well as the issuer agents and holders and all their parties as well.
Cool. So before I ask some questions about what this kind of future of smart contracting looks like, let's take us back to the beginning, James. How did you get passionate about smart contracting and blockchain in the first place?
Yeah, so as we have an intro to myself, I'm an engineer by trade, so electrical engineer, grew up in Canada and moved to Australia just after university and got involved in the oil and gas industry. Really enjoyed my time there, but even going back further than that, I always had a really strong personal interest in philosophy, economics, finance, even politics to some degree. And so when I was in my early teens, I'd kind of come across the idea of cyber cash as being a inevitable, the way the people that forecasted it, sort of inevitable element of the internet and microprocessors and encryption. And I was quite intrigued by the idea at the time. And I remember thinking quite a bit about it. And then fast forward to 2012, when I came across Bitcoin, I think it was a Silk Road article, and it just clicked in my head. I said, this is that cyber cash. Like, we as a society have figured it out. And at the time, as intriguing as it was, I was so busy working huge hours in the oil and gas industry that I didn't have a chance to really get stuck in, but it was just always in my head. So I was constantly watching every article that came out. I was kind of thinking about it more. And then my vision started to evolve as I learned more. And I think in 2017, when I felt like the key questions had been answered satisfactorily, I felt that the time was right to maybe try and make a contribution. And so that's where my mind turned. I just really thought, like, how can I get involved in this? How can I push this technology forward? And so I basically, at some point in 2017, 2018, I basically just quit my job and just, I'm gonna put 6 months into this. I'm gonna read everything I can about it, learn about all the technical details, and then figure out what kind of businesses can be created from it. And during that process, I came to the conclusion that Bitcoin, as is originally envisioned, which I see Bitcoin SV as being the only network that really has that vision in all of its details, as being really, really compelling, novel, and it will be a future piece to the internet, essentially, as a core foundational technology. And then the second conclusion I came to was that contracts, and more broadly commercial records, were the most compelling use case, and probably we're going to be the biggest winner in terms of businesses, in terms of impact on the world. And then drilling down a little more, I saw contracts in the private markets as being the big opportunity, the lowest hanging fruit, the biggest step change in sort of value. And so that's where I started focusing my efforts, writing business plans, white papers. And then during that process, I also realized that we're going to need a protocol to basically make this work, because all the protocols that we saw at that point were all sort of, in my point, prototypes, toys, very narrow in scope. So that's what I set my mind to, is just figure out how to get a protocol that everyone could use, that was, more akin to like an ISO standard that sort of really considered everyone's interests and had all the features and details accounted for. And then shortly after the alpha version of that, after I got a lot of the hard intellectual problems sorted, the CoinGeek Enchain Inducement Prize contest was announced. So kind of like an X Prize style.
So before we talk about the prize and everything, let's go back to these conclusions you made, because, I'd say both are not shared by most, and especially one of those two conclusions you came to. But let's start with the less controversial, smart contracting kind of being the lowest hanging fruit. Do you still see that as the case today? And, what are the elements that made you really feel confident that, hey, this is the lowest hanging fruit, this is where I want to ideally spend the next, many decades of my life, building?
Yeah, so for me, I always look at things in terms of like value proposition, and try to put myself in the place of people using it and how much value does it offer them. And for me, contracts, I think a lot of people share this, are just a tremendous pain in the backside, and especially all the record keeping elements to it. And it can just take up so much time, and time of very high value people who would rather be doing more interesting, more valuable things for their business. And I saw a lot of redundancy. So it's just something I observed, and I had a personal belief in that a lot of that redundancy can be simplified and automated, just lent itself well to software. And then I also think this is maybe a little bit more controversial, but I think that blockchain is not as broad in terms of value prop or the type of use cases or businesses that it transform as the internet. So I think the internet is extremely broad. Many big businesses were built from it, and there's just a tremendous amount of innovation that can be done and value unlocked. I think blockchain is a lot more narrow. I think it touches a lot of things and will touch a lot of things, but I see the immutable record keeping and the timestamping function, which is really central to the value prop, as being particularly relevant to commercial records that are inherently contentious, right? It's critical that every detail is accounted for and timestamped properly, because, if you get into lawsuits, disputes, those costs just balloon, and a small error can have an enormous impact on those parties, right? So just that, even in itself, is a very, very compelling thing to improve or to simplify or reduce errors from. yeah, that's how I sort of saw it. I just saw that those are inherently lend themselves well to it. And even if blockchain, let's say having records on chain added a lot of costs in terms of the complexity to manage them and the cost to actually store on chain, because at the time, a lot of blockchains were sort of seen as quite expensive on a per byte basis to store. I thought most commercial records, the value of them were far in excess of the fairly small payloads. So the value to bytes or storage footprint was extreme, right? So a $500 million contract could be 1 megabyte, right? So storing on blockchain for a few dollars, $5, whatever it was, inconsequential. And then having that record keeping layer that's significantly better, significantly more trustful, to me was a tremendous value add compared to the costs.
What do you see as some of the areas that people are building in blockchain where you don't really see that blockchain has a really strong value proposition to transform an industry?
So, I mean, some of the use cases around gaming, gambling, I think there are elements to it where it will embed itself into it, and there'll be some important interoperability and efficiencies that will gain from it. But I don't see a lot of gamers or gamblers being too worried about the timestamping function. I think they're sort of, it's for them, it's just a bit of fun. They're not really too worried about all the underpinnings, and the trust for them is really about when they do something, does the response come back to them in the way they expect it to? And that trust can be built up very quickly. And I don't think blockchain and going and verifying independently adds a lot of value. That's one, I guess, is I stand apart from others on.
Cool. Yeah. This is definitely not the agreement webinar. Just always looking to get different opinions here. Even though that we're a big fan of some gaming blockchain companies as well. Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. There's a lot of areas of which blockchain is not as widely applicable as the internet. I would be curious though how you view the impact, and it's hard to quantify this stuff, but when I typically speak with others, I never try to make the claim that blockchain is maybe as wide reaching in terms of everything that it touches, and that it will continue to change as the creation of the internet. But its impacts may be even greater because of the importance of having, let's say, contracts where you just know what happens and it just can be trusted. How would you think about the impact of, say, internet broadly versus blockchain broadly if, the future of the world comes in the way that you are building towards?
Yeah, so I think I agree. The final end state of all the private markets, all sort of commercial records, and the public markets as well, all being on chain, I think has a tremendous impact on fraud, or the potential for fraud just kind of removes options from the equation. So I think the multiple sets of books example of fraud is the most important one. So if you can fundamentally intertwine all of the global economy's records so they can't be pulled out and isolated and then manipulated, is really, really, really important. So it becomes trivial to verify that this is indeed the real set of books, and that everything is there, nothing's missing, nothing's been manipulated. I think that we can just strip, not only in terms of the actual damage to people in terms of fraud, so like the victims, but also just remove the incentive to even try, and all the effort spent on creating books and trying to fraud people and all the communication elements to it. But I think the actual private market is just digitizing them properly and really doing a good job of it, and then delivering amazing solutions on top of that. Private markets significantly bigger than public markets, right? Like most of global commerce is in the private markets. And so if you think about how enormous those numbers are, and if you can strip out 2%, 3% in terms of efficiency, in terms of labor, in terms of even just mind share, I think, the numbers could be enormous. Like you could see actual effectively GDP increases in the 0.5%, 1%, that kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised in some economies.
Yeah. So getting back to this other conclusion you made when kind of evaluating the different protocols, I guess first tell us more about your process of how you evaluated the different blockchains out there. As there's way more now, but there were still a fair number at the time you did this. So how do you go about looking at them, and just tell us more about the process you took and why you came to the conclusion that this kind of original version of Bitcoin was the thing you wanted to stake your kind of business on?
Yeah, sure. So I think I came at it again because I wanted to build a business. So I was thinking about it the whole time from value prop was the idea. So like trying to distill down what blockchain was in terms of how it added value. And then with that lens going, comparing all different solutions, right? How does this blockchain differ in terms of philosophy or design parameters? And how does that impact the value prop that I can deliver to customers? So that was kind of always a lens that I think a lot of people don't kind of naturally have, or at least come into the study of blockchains with. I think they're always looking at it from more from a technical perspective and like, wow, it's a beautiful algorithm, or it's that's a neat way of accomplishing the problem. So I think that was set me apart a little bit. And when I was looking at all the blockchains, I really just tried to build a mental model and then stress test it. So I go and find contrarian opinions that disagree with my current understanding of things and try to pick apart what my model or my arguments were compared to theirs. And then so I went and just reached out to lots of people and read every article I could find on a specific issue that I was evaluating and tried to keep the whole thing holistically and balance all those ideas out. And I feel like Craig Wright was a big help there as well. So when I'd seen the controversy around him fairly early on, rather than reading articles about opinions on him, I just went and found him and started talking to him directly and asking him questions. And I pretty much spent 6 months nearly directly asking him questions nearly every single day, even at the beginning, trying to trip him up, see if I could find, flaws in his reasoning, or where he got defensive, or where things didn't match up. And what I found in that process was just incredible consistency from him, just over incredible long periods of time, over a tremendously complex set of ideas. I found his responsiveness was just next day he'd be answering. If it wasn't like right away, he'd answer, and you'd have very comprehensive answers, and you'd be able to reference and cite things, which just to me showed he'd really, really thought about it and was, front of mind. And then the things he shared, I just thought were extremely, extremely high quality judgments, opinions. I think his perspective was, I think a lot of people kind of imagine Satoshi as sort of this mythical, pure Jesus-like figure, almost with nothing but the noblest intentions, and a person who wants nothing but good for mankind and all that, right? And I think, yeah, okay, maybe, but I think almost Craig, I don't take away from Craig's wanting to do well, or wanting to do good things for society and having the technology benefit mankind. But I think almost some of his cynical takes on things, to me, resonates or is more. It's more likely that Satoshi, who created an economic system, did not have rose-colored glasses, had a true understanding of human nature, all of its flaws as well as positives. And so that just really fit for me. He's that the kind of system was built, he seemed like the right kind of person and mindset and perspective and the skills to have it, and everything he said to me backed up. And then I take his arguments and go and find the other authority figures and leaders and test those points against theirs. And in nearly every case, they hadn't thought about it. They didn't have an answer. They got defensive.
What are some examples of that? And I'm also just amazed. I never knew that you just were able to get direct access to Craig so early, as well as getting access to the other people. So yeah, how did you go about asking these other leaders, and what happened there?
So it was mostly in the chat groups and things like that, or Twitter. Yeah, I mean, there was hundreds of little questions that I had during that period. I can't even, lots of little things like scaling, just the concept of scaling, UTXO versus account, some of the cryptography discussions.
Well, let's slow down for the sake of our audience, James. So just maybe explain the difference between account-based systems and UTXO systems. And if you remember anyone specifically that you talked to about this, that perhaps others on the call would know, would love to hear any little anecdotes that you remember, even if just on Twitter or chat group.
Yeah, so I honestly could not piece together a specific story on a specific point because it was just a flurry of daily back and forth reading tons of stuff. But accounts, what I think is really important about Bitcoin is the UTXO model. So the UTXO model is basically a stateless predicate style script. Like script is the underlying programmable language of Bitcoin. And it either evaluates to be true or it doesn't. And it doesn't depend on the state of other UTXOs, so other coins being held at locking scripts. And so that, in my view, is extremely parallelizable. I think that's what gives Bitcoin its scalability, effectively unbounded. And account-based, like let's say Ethereum's a classic example. You have basically a single account, and you have actions that adjust that account, like contracts basically, so calls to the contract. But what happens there is the actual sequence of changes to that contract are inherently serial, and the order is extremely important to the state of the contract. So you end up with an inability to scale at a contract level in terms of going parallel. You kind of are single threaded fundamentally, and then taking that idea across many, many nodes is extremely, extremely difficult, because then you have like real-time disagreements about what came first, and it is like systemic. It's almost foundational to all of the contracts, right? Because then it's not just one party with one set of agreements that just need to be reconciled and resolved. It becomes potentially millions and millions of parties. So I feel like that is a critical issue. And it doesn't, the account-based and the smart contract system that Ethereum has, what are the trade-offs? What do you get for that style of, on-chain contract that's a little bit more flexible in terms of its programming language? I would say you don't get anything. It doesn't really add to anyone. Like, so issuers don't care, the holders don't care, regulators don't care. So there's, in my view, from a value proposition perspective, you're adding technical complexity and limitations that doesn't give you anything back. Whereas the UTXO model, I think, can do everything that issuers and holders care about from value perspective, efficiency, performance. But it doesn't take away from the timestamping, doesn't take away from the sequence of events, the ordering. So that's kind of how I looked at it, is just, what do these trade-offs give you in return for the complexity and the design choices?
Would what you envisioned at the time, I know the answer for now, but when you got started, was there another blockchain that could have even, been possible to build the tokenized protocol on, or did it have to be Bitcoin?
So, I mean, for pretty superficial reasons, it really had to be Bitcoin Cash at the time or Bitcoin SV. But you could have, another Bitcoin derivative, like even Litecoin and some of these other, like basically just copy paste Bitcoin networks, but then they tweaked a few parameters. I feel like ultimately those parameters could be tweaked to massage a little bit in a trivial way, ultimately to get an outcome that would work for tokenized. But a bigger problem I saw was not only that they didn't have those parameter choices in place, we couldn't do it right away. We'd have to go and sort of lobby to get it changed. But the community around them, in my view, wasn't serious. And it wasn't, if you go to Twitter and you hear people talking in sort of high level terms and marketing the network and trying to pump the price, you might have a false impression of how serious people were and how supported it was and how hardworking people were. But when I started to like dig deeper and look at real technical people and really hardcore discussions and just seeing how kind of activity is, I just feel like there was no support at all, really. Like they didn't believe that those networks are gonna, be around in 5 years. They couldn't care less. They weren't building like they had conviction. And that's where I thought BCH at the time and then BSV that stood out. So it's sort of like an intangible element to it that I think is critical, is the culture and the people around it and the momentum that's being built. So in my view, no other network even came close to it on just that point alone. So even Ethereum, I think there's a lot of projects being built, but I feel like, and there's definitely some hardcore believers, but I just didn't see the real conviction and good business sense or judgments in terms of why they were building the things they were and what goals they had.
And then now that, you've gotten to where you are today, there's, if you were, offered, hey, like we'll give you $100 million to port over this network, would it even be possible to do that? Or is there not another network today that would allow kind of tokenized as it exists today to operate?
So there's, I think, 9,000 chains. So who knows? There might be some out there that have taken Bitcoin SV pretty close to that, and they had the critical parameters and giant choices. But I would be shocked if it was on the money, and I'd be shocked if they had the drive and the quality of people, and they're actually scaling it and putting the hardcore work into it. So in my view, based on everything I've seen, I would say absolutely not. I would not, even for 100 million kind of thing. I just wouldn't want to destroy tokenized over it in the long run.
Yeah.
My vision is I want tokenized to be an absolutely really impactful company that's lasts 20, 30 years at least, and accomplishes the things that we're setting out to do. I don't want to sacrifice it.
Yeah. So on scale, when you just kind of mentioned, if there was maybe a copy of BSV, they probably wouldn't be doing the hard scaling work. Like, what is the hard scaling work? Can you describe that? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, so when you start to get to the really big numbers in transactional throughput, there's just a lot of hardcore back-end infrastructure type engineering that goes on to making it efficient, making it performant, and then coordinating with all the other nodes in terms of the flows and the policies and things like that. So that's sort of what the Terra node team is working on now, which is, I think, mostly end-chain at this point, but directed by the Bitcoin Association, but it's free for anyone else to compete on that basis. The protocol is open source. Anyone create their own Terra node or upgrade the current Bitcoin node implementation. But I think that's a really critical piece of work. I think that could take, they're going to be engineering for years and years, and they're going to be learning as it actually scales and gathering data to kind of optimize things. But it does require really, really, really talented people, in my view, that really understand the Bitcoin protocol and understand the objectives and the value prop. And then it just requires a lot of like working through the details, actually testing things, putting the real effort in. And I don't see any team really doing it in a credible manner. So you can throw 30 bodies at it and pay them a lot of money and still not get the result that you need. It's a very delicate process. You need a really solid vision. You need people who really understand the vision in a very detailed way. And you need the people that kind of a small team really of really high quality people that can deliver on that. And I've yet to see any other team that even comes close to sort of the people involved with BSV doing that work.
And again, I understand the culture here, but can you just describe like what the work is even doing? So you're saying like node software, for those of us listening, or for those people listening that don't know what node software is, like why does that need to be updated and upgraded and have a bunch of really smart people working on it? How is that an impediment to scale?
Yeah, so it's just, so the node software is basically what miners do to validate scripts, create blocks, reject transactions, accept them, communicate that they've accepted them, communicate, publish those blocks, like broadcast them when they've won one, verify other blocks that other miners have created and say like, this is our block candidate. So that's kind of that process. It's just when you start to get to really extreme numbers, like 1 million transactions a second plus, there's a lot of optimizations that are required in order to handle that throughput in a way that's predictable and that doesn't undermine Bitcoin's value prop, so that the system can depend on it, particularly when it comes to like sort of real-time commercial activity. So if Tokenized wants our customers to be able to send a payment or execute a contract and then have that be confirmed within 2 seconds, which I think is critical for a mainstream appealing system, to do that reliably, there's just so many elements of good hardcore software engineering and risk management and probabilistic kind of analysis to make it work. It's all achievable. It's just, a lot of details there to get done.
Yeah, and then to put that in perspective for everyone, like Visa, the max that any kind of transaction processor has been able to get of any kind, blockchain or not, is about 50,000. BSV has gone to 100,000. But I know, James, you're building, as you said, for millions of transactions. So there's definitely some work to be done there. Dave, I see you have a question here.
Yeah, on the topic of scaling, obviously you want to pick a blockchain which scales unboundedly, so it's never really a concern. But I'm curious, just from the point of view of tokenized, if Bitcoin SV is just only supporting tokenized and you're a successful business, I know you're a really numbers-oriented guy, so I'm sure you've mapped this out. Like, what level of transaction throughput do you think in a success state? You can kind of define that however you want. What level do you need for tokenized for scalability?
So I think on the order of 1 million transactions a second for commercial record-keeping processes. By that, that's what sort of modern approaches to visibility and conventions in finance. So I think the micro payments paradigm and a properly digitized private markets could transform how many transactions a second actually take place in the secondary market. So, and just general commercial events. So that, I think we're looking at 1 million would be more than enough for 30 years, even with pushing the envelope with micropayments and more divisibility. But you never know how finance will kind of evolve and what kind of needs are required. So So in my view, $1 million would be more than enough for 10, 20 years plus for everything to be done. So there's huge headroom, and that includes other use cases. But I mean, having the headroom for 10 million and things like that would be exciting. And we'd love to explore what we could do with it and if there's value to be had there. But I mean, in the short term, you know, even if it was 50,000, I think we could deliver significant value, because a lot of the contracts in the private markets don't trade a lot, right? Generally, just by the nature of the business, right? It's difficult to have a public market like order book and transaction volume when the business is inherently difficult to value. There might not be revenue or predictable reports to work off of. So that's where we think that the transaction volume can actually be quite low and still deliver value to the private markets with smart contracts. So in our view, in the short term, even medium term, it's not a concern at all. Even 50,000, you know, transaction second would be more than enough. But to really push the envelope to our entire vision, I think we'd need about 1 million transactions a second as a peak transactional throughput.
Right. So that's kind of adding up all these existing systems across, you know, all the volume they're doing across different systems, and then adding on a premium for the new transactions which don't currently exist, because now you can do X, Y, and Z, which isn't possible today.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
And yeah, you can take these numbers out pretty far too. That's some of the things that I think a lot of people don't appreciate is when you really push the divisibility of instruments, like rather than billions of shares of Apple, trillions or quadrillions, some of the numbers get really staggering quite quickly in terms of storage footprint, in terms of bandwidth, things like that. So it quickly becomes shocking, even in like AWS costs and things like that. But still, I think there's value to be had there. And it's really just about gathering data, learning about the value prop as we go on, and learning from customers and tweaking and optimizing and kind of figuring out where the boundaries really are in terms of value versus cost.
I do want to get a little bit more into the history of tokenized, because I'm not sure if there's any like recorded media that takes kind of all the way from the beginning. So you've built the protocol now, you've thought through a lot of the, you know, the tough stuff, and now it's time to execute. And then you hear about this CoinGeek thing. What is CoinGeek, and what was the contest they were doing?
Yeah, so it was a CoinGeek end chain, and it was like an X Prize basically. So £5 million for any team and come up with a smart contract tokenization protocol for Bitcoin Cash at the time. So I actually didn't even react to it when it first got announced. I was sort of more focused on the business. I thought it'd be a distraction, and I wasn't sure how, you know, likely it was going to come off, or if it was real even. And so I just carried on doing my thing. But then I think I got a couple key developers on board to start doing a proof of concept and get ready to raise money for the company. And then at that point, I just sort of said, heck it, we're already doing it. May as well just throw an entry in. And then it became quite clear that the only other people that were really having a go at this, I thought, just were not even thinking about the problem correctly. And it was fairly, you know, so it sort of became, I thought this would be a very good chance of us, you know, having winning it. And ultimately, that's what the result was. And that was a really, really helpful sort of milestone for us. And then, yeah, we spent a good 1.5 years refining the protocol, working on all the details after that. And then we started to move into the platform work. So how do we make this protocol useful to enterprises? And then that was another sort of 1.5 years, 2 years. And then we really moved into the user experience. But one thing that is unique is that I think most protocols, you know, regardless of whether talking blockchain protocols or smart contracts and token protocols, because there's some try to do all in one, and there's different kind of approaches, but usually you have big teams, like fairly large teams, doing just one, and then you got another big team or multiple teams doing the next layer, and then you got another big team in separate companies even doing like the product, the consumer experience, let's say. But they don't really talk to each other. They're very segregated. They have different kind of goals and ambitions. I think what's kind of unique about us is that we really tried to do the whole thing together. So we took the user experience and we'd feed those insights about what we wanted back into the protocol and back into the platform layer. And so there's sort of an end-to-end with a user experience driven mindset to refine not only the protocol, but all the layers in between up to the front end. And I think that has yielded really, really important insights for us and has allowed us to create a lot of value that other protocols kind of get stuck at. So they'll create a protocol, they'll have some design choices that make sense for them. But then when you finally get down years later to the wallet, you'll find there's really, really limiting elements to it that become almost impossible to fix at that point. And so I think that's one side of what's one really important consideration for why we think we're going to lead the pack soon.
Cool. So I guess fast forwarding a little bit more. So now you've built this tokenized protocol, you've built this software suite, you're out in the market. What have you been focusing on and why in terms of your go-to-market strategy? Because obviously your ambition is to really be at the core of how private markets operate and interact with one another. But so there's a lot of places to start. What made you start with where you are today?
So one thing I think is important for us to be successful is to be a technology platform or solution provider to the financial industry, which is where I think the big money and the big opportunity is you really, really have to be credible. Like you have to be a very, very high quality product. You have to have a very resilient, reliable infrastructure that ticks all the boxes in terms of security, documentation. The terminology has to be perfect in my view. It has to appeal to kind of like legal minds as well as finance guys as well as tech guys. So you're kind of appealing to a number of different types of people, I guess. And so for us, we thought that there's a lot of people having a go at this, and the most important thing was the actual product itself in terms of appealing to those people, and that it was really a race to deliver on all the features that everyone there's lots of players in this space. Lots of them are trying to do the same thing. A lot of money is being poured into it. And I think there's widespread acceptance that this is the future of finance. And I think most people understand the value prop from a high level and are actively looking to work with companies to understand them and try to capture that value in the long term. I think the bottleneck has really been about delivering the solution. So I don't want to name names, but some players have been at this 8, 9, 10 years, hundreds of millions of dollars invested, and they just haven't got the product. They haven't got the solution. You can't use it. If you want to have smart contracts, you want to do the trades, you want to do the administration elements, it does not exist. It's just all ideas at this moment and roadmaps. So for us, that's really the critical path, is we just need to get to that sort of MVP in a really compelling way with all the features ahead of everyone else. And the value prop in terms of pricing and performance just needs to be there. So in our sort of strategic ways, we just need to get there as quick as we can and beat everyone else. And then there'll be no choice for a lot of people. If we can tick all the boxes and we can actually work now, it's very easy to get people on board and trying out your protocol and then sort of locking in and starting to earn money from that than it is to try and, position yourself as the best in the industry. We don't have it, but trust us, we'll deliver. Maybe you can do that if you got an incredible reputation and worked at some of the biggest banks in the world, and you can sort of leverage that. But we didn't have that. So we had to just go by pure merit, pure product, and build something that everyone can get behind, including the BlackRocks, including the Goldman Sachs. So that was kind of our strategy and the kind of approach we're taking, and continue to take an approach. And I think it's starting to be validated. So a lot of people who are interested, there's just a tremendous number of issuers and businesses that are really, really interested in this. They have budgets ready to explore it. They want, they got tokens they want to issue. And when they see our product, I think it does stand apart from everyone else at the moment.
Yeah. So speaking of, we actually have the, the kind of leader of one of your biggest customers here today, Garrett of Troy Money. James, do you want to just talk to us a little bit about kind of how this deal happened and what you're building with Garrett? And yeah, James, you can start. Garrett, I'm going to unmute your mic, so feel free to chime in yourself at any point if you'd like as well.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of meeting Garrett, was it now 12 weeks ago, something like that? And yeah. So he's a man that's been very interested in blockchain technology, security tokens, sort of the digital transformation of contracts, and has been watching the space and trying to get involved since I think 2017 was, I think, the number. Had his mineral coins, so he had some mineral rights that he wanted to sell off from some of his mining interests and tokenize them. And so he's had projects in mind, wanting to actually use it from an issuer's perspective, been really, really engaged with the whole kind of community and market. So he's been talking to everyone that's in the space, knows all the players, knows the solutions. And I think his conclusion from the conversations we had was basically that these solutions all suck. Like they're not they're years from being ready to do the things that I need to do in an easy way. They're too complex conceptually, all the way down to the bottom level. I didn't understand it. Too many hoops to jump through, which I agree with on all those points. But yeah, so he has been watching from afar, waiting for this to develop and mature. And he was, I think, recently looking at a few different solutions like Stellar, Ravencoin, and then came across Bitcoin SV. And that was, I think, what, 14 weeks ago, something 2 weeks before you kind of encountered me. And he was just basically, seeing what was out there, kind of came across it, exploring the solutions. And then I think he saw me on Twitter. I think there was like a real world asset account that I've been posting on, replying to. Joined Twitter, Telegram. We got to talking and started talking every day for a good month at least, and kind of just sharing my vision. And he was grilling me hard in a really good way, asking really good questions. And I could tell he was really engaged, really thinking about it. And then I think he said, okay, well, this sounds like this is it. Everything is tangible and real. It makes sense. And then also, I think some of the things I was saying kind of unlocked new ideas for him that I think were possible. But if I pause there, maybe I can give Garrett a chance to speak.
Actually, I saw you on stage at the London Blockchain conference, and I was impressed then. And I was listening to all the different stuff as my research into BSV was ongoing. And then I reached out to you, I think, on Twitter and then LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, but Twitter and Telegram. And you're right, we have our thoughts were aligned. James is a very technical, very thinking through all the details, and I'm more of a overview, 30,000 foot. We can do it. Let's execute. Let's use my assets that I have, and my projects, and let's just jump in and go. Because he had a protocol that was just launching, and I had an idea that was ready to go and the infrastructure. So we just kind of put Troy money together. And originally I wasn't thinking about payments or micropayments. That was far from my thought process. But as the more I learned into the abilities of BSV, the further we could push the project to actually be gold as money. And not just gold, but stable coins as money, silver, platinum, any useful commodity with liquidity could be money on BSV, and could be money on his platform, because his platform is very sophisticated and works exactly like. I've been trying to get the Ethereum guys that I was working with for almost 6 years. I was trying to get them to make it work like James had it working. So it was kind of perfect. And we've been working together every day ever since. I start talking to him at 5 p.m. my time, and it's 7 a.m. his time. We put in 3 hours, 4 hours, and then he goes, and then I get up and start. And so we're 24/7 pretty much between his team and my team, and we're developing this out to be a good use case for how tokenized can work.
Yeah, and I won't share any details that are sensitive, but we got a much bigger vision that we share that is, a lot coming. So there's kind of like a stepping stone to much more coming. And, the kind of the vision that I've been espousing for a long time, is on the way now. Great.
So kind of a question here from someone in the audience. I understand now, while a lot of people don't really understand Bitcoin, kind of the need for like an infrastructure provider, but what's stopping in 5, 10, 15 years from big companies just like having someone like James on their staff and kind of doing this themselves? Like what would be involved if a large company tried to like replicate tokenized to interact with the blockchain rather than just using, your software, your protocol?
So they absolutely can do that. The main challenge, I think, would be just the huge CapEx, time, and execution risk. So before I started Tokenized, I didn't appreciate kind of software in the way that I do now, and how difficult it is to align really good people and get that peak horsepower applied for 50 hours a week, let's say, or 45 hours a week in a really important way. So I just think a lot of companies are unable to build really complex solutions. I don't think they can do it. I don't think they can hire for it. I don't think they can incentivize and then create the environment to actually deliver. And so what we hope to do is just have the solution available. There's no vendor lock-in. You can go and build a competitor to us. And, you know, some companies will be able to do it and probably will have the will to do it. But if we can get our pricing right and we can stay ahead, we can continue to out innovate them and continue to add more features, because I think we'll be adding features for 20, 30 years. Like, it's a never ending process to get better and better to deliver on the vision. So that's how we want to stay ahead, is we want to just get our pricing right, get our reputation down, you know, build word of mouth through good service, and then also continue to innovate at the fastest possible rate. And I think we as a team and culture can do that with as good as anyone in the world. I think we're at a world-class level in terms of actually rate of innovation, delivering features, and we'll be testing in the market soon. We'll find out if that's true, but that's kind of our approach.
Zach, I'm just going to add one thing. You can't teach passion. You can't teach the passion that James has for the solution. And you can get all the programming teams in you want. The big banks can get whatever programming teams, but the passion for delivering the best product for the solution is key to this. And that's what James and his team bring, the passion.
Okay, well, James, thank you so much for telling us your story and how Tokenized got to where it is here. And thank you so much for listening today and learning about one of these incredible companies that we've invested in here at Unbounded Capital. So have a great rest of your day. We will probably not do another webinar for for 1 month versus the normal 2 weeks because of the summit week. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks.